I want to ask you, if you took part in an activity that I found myself incredibly engaged in last night, how many of you have been watching the Olympics? Like, I'm really happy. We cut the cable when we moved to Sterlington. Like we said, we're just going to live off of Netflix completely, which is pretty awesome most of the time. And we get NBC, though, and we were watching the Olympics. And I've not watched it that much until the last few days. And I know some people are big fans of curling. I mean, it looks like, I did see somebody like with a Swiffer and a Roomba do it. Did y'all see that on Facebook? That was pretty awesome. That was ingenuitive. But I'll tell y'all what I was watching last night that just boggles my mind. I got on Wikipedia and kind of read about it, but it was skeleton racing. Have you watched this yet? So somebody gets onto a sled that weighs like 50 pounds, and it looks like they're wearing a unitard and a helmet. And they go down like the bobsled track at 80 miles an hour. And the only way they're controlling things is like tiny, minute body movements and the way they breathe and shifting and that sort of a thing. And that's how they're steering. You know, earlier this week I was talking to some folks about why I think that Winter Olympics is better than the Summer Olympics. And the reason why ultimately I realize it's better is because there's more chances you can die in the Winter Olympics. And I think there's no other scarier way that something bad can happen than the skeleton. I mean, I think about if body movements are how you control this thing, if the way your weight shifts is how you control it, I do not want to be any part of a skeleton race. Because I cannot imagine what happened when 300 pounds of me is hurtling down like an ice floe on a sketchy sled that weighs like 50 pounds. I can see right now a couple of people around here, like if we let's go to Harbor Freight, let's get those little dollies. But like these tiny little things. Tiny little things. We talk about that a lot. I talk about that a lot, but we're incredibly aware of what happens with details. Think about that. Think about like how catastrophic it would be in all these Olympic sports. We're watching like the ski jumping. Like I think every single thing that's dangerous all boils down to said person having a tremendous control over tiny things that they're doing with their body. Like this, I watched ski jump last night. That looks crazy too. Like everything looks crazy. We were watching the grand slalom and saw like these two guys like fall, and one of them like tore his ACL and like it's like tumble like a video game. Like all these tiny little things have just tremendous power. And I know in my life, a lot of times I forget about the tiny things. You think about what small little decisions or small little actions or small little things that we do in our life, how much they can control things, how much they can cause good things to happen, how much they can prevent bad things from happening, or how much they can cause bad things to happen. This morning, I want us just to look a little bit more into the story of the book of Kings and talk about these little things. Because sometimes we have a tendency to overlook what little can do for us. So we're going to jump in 2 Kings. We're going forward, and we're going to talk about the story of Elisha. Now, the last couple weeks, we've talked about Elijah. There's two different guys. It's kind of easy. I've been playing like the game when I'm studying during the week, like what person got the names wrong, like that single letter who got, I mean, it varies, but Elijah and Elisha. Now, Elijah seemed pretty cool. We did the story a couple weeks ago about the 450 prophets of Baal, and he called fire down out of the sky and like burned everything up. I was talking with Jason Lyons that week afterwards. He's like, man, that was like the most like heavy metal thing in the Bible ever. And then I said, well, let me tell you, Elisha, like he got really mad because some kids were making fun of him being bald. So he called down a she-bear out of the mountains, and then the bear ate all the kids. And he's like, yeah, it's not the most metal thing in the Bible. We're not going to talk about that story. I kind of want to chase that rabbit trail on another day, but we're not going to talk about that. But Elisha was his successor, and Elisha performed many different miracles. But what's so interesting about Elisha is if you look at what he did, it was all tiny little things. And it was all things that benefited a single person or a small group of people. It was things like he was working with, he had this, what they call the school of prophets. So it was like his understudies and the people he worked with, his ministry with, like they were like building a new like place to live, and one of them borrowed an axe, and the axe head fell in the river, and he was bummed because his borrowed axe head fell in the river. And so Elisha like threw a stick in the river, and the axe head floated. Or like they were making dinner one night and they realized they accidentally put a poisonous a vegetable into this pot, and they poisoned the whole pot, and Elisha prayed over it and threw flour and made it. It's different, very, very different kinds of miracles. A lot of little stuff. And today we're going to talk about one of those little things, but it's a story about little and big, and it's a story about significance and a story about insignificance. It's a story about assumptions in many ways, but it's also a very wild story. This story would make a great movie. There's characters upon characters and just movements and tiny, it's fantastic. I would love to see this as like a 4-part Netflix miniseries. I would power watch it, and then I'll talk about it on Sunday afterwards probably. But let's open up our Bible, 2 Kings chapter 5, and we're going to start reading the very beginning of the chapter. And this is what it says. So the king of Aram had great admiration for Naaman, the commander of his army, because through him the Lord had given Aram great victories. But though Naaman was a mighty warrior, he suffered from leprosy. So Aram, it's this kingdom. It's centered around the town of Damascus. And for a long time, they had just been incessantly attacking Israel. In many ways, like war with Aram was the norm. Like peace with Aram was the exception. The Israelite people were just used to these raiding parties and these armies just coming consistently from this area around Damascus and just attacking and taking and attacking and taking and attacking and taking. It was just this never-ending process. And Naaman was the commander of these king's armies. It says, or in Scripture, he was a great man. He was highly admirable. I remember when I was a kid growing up, when I was 10, 11 years old, when the first Gulf War conflict, you remember storming Norman Schwarzkopf? Remember these pictures of him? I remember reading, I was like in 3rd grade, I remember reading a story how he kept 2 watches on at all times. He had a watch of in-country time, and he had a watch with Pentagon time on. Like these just stories about Norman Schwarzkopf. That's like Naaman. Or also, my dad was a big fan of General Patton. Y'all seeing this image right here from that biopic about him. Like Naaman was a guy like Schwarzkopf or like Patton or like Eisenhower, like General MacArthur. Like people knew like when Naaman shows up, they're going to win. There's nothing to worry about. I mean, he is highly revered. Naaman had everything. But Naaman was a leper, which also means Naaman has nothing. This was the guy who was not supposed to have a weakness in any way, shape, or form. And he had the largest weakness of that world. Everybody had to know. You have to think about, like, what does it look like for the king to handle this? Like, they can't, like, not be using Naaman in combat. So it's like, Naaman, you just stay at your house until the last minute, or do we keep you, like wrapped up and nobody knows where you are, and all of a sudden you just, like, show up? Like, imagine how complicated is it for your great, huge, high commander of your army to have leprosy. In spite of having everything, Naaman has nothing. A leper was considered to be the living dead. Naaman had achieved all there is to be achieved, but he's absolutely excluded. In Scripture, especially in the Old Testament, you have to think the way leprosy is kind of like bad people get leprosy. Like leprosy is seen as a punishment from God. Leprosy is seen as something that God inflicts upon those who do not do right by him. It makes them like ceremonially unclean because it's about blemishes. So they're not able to go and have a relationship with God. And it sounds kind of weird, because like, well, Chad, he's not from Israel. Like, what's going on here? Well, kind of like a secondary story is the fact that King David, hundreds of years before this, actually conquered the area of Aram and Damascus. And you'll see this weird thing going on across Scripture about this area being aware of who God is, and people knowing God and fearing God coming out of this area. So Naaman had nothing and had everything at the exact same time. And the thing I want us to think about today is this, and to reflect on our own lives is this, that little leads to little, but large loves lepers. We jump further in the story, pick it up in verse 2. The problem's getting bigger now. So at this time, the Aramean raiders had invaded the land of Israel, and among the captives was a young girl who'd been given to Naaman's wife as a maid. And one day the girl said to her mistress, "I wish my master would go see the prophet in Samaria. He would heal him of his leprosy." So Naaman told the king what the young girl from Israel had said. "Go and visit the prophet." The king of Aram told him, "I will send a letter of introduction for you to take to the king of Israel." So Naaman started out carrying gifts, 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter to the king of Israel said, "With this letter I present my servant Naaman. I want you to heal him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes in dismay and said, "This man sends me a leper to heal? Am I God, that I can give life and take it away? I can see that he's just trying to pick a fight with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his clothes in dismay, he sent this message to him: "Why are you so upset? Send Naaman to me, and he will learn that there is a true prophet in Israel." So think about that. I mean, let's picture this. So like your enemy who is coming and raiding you nonstop sends to you the person who is leading these raids. And I imagine they're kind of crossing borders, and we find out later on with like the full military force of what's going on. They cross over. This looks like it's going to be the raid of all raids. Like this looks like this is going to be the mission that completely wipes us out as a people. And they show up to the king's door. And I imagine they had to have some sort of like a flag of peace or to get in there. I mean, they might have been thinking this was like a sneak attack the whole time too anyway. And Naaman walks into the king and presents this letter. And okay, all this stuff, the 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, 10 sets of clothing, this equals out to roughly $750 million in today's money. So he comes and drops that at him and says, "Oh, here's this letter. I need you to heal him." Like, the scripture doesn't even mention who the king of Israel is at the time. You see how the way his behavior just kind of removes him from the story. But he's flipping out. He's like, nobody can heal. And at this point in time in Scripture, one person has healed somebody of leprosy, and his name was Moses. And that happened hundreds of years before this. And he's just losing his gourd here. It's like, I can't do this. This is nuts. And why are you even sending him to me? We see kings act how kings act. This king of Aram was making the assumption that Elisha, a person powerful enough to heal leprosy, he must be in the king's court, like one of the king's attendants. Like he has to be there and in front of all of this. Said the Israeli kings, like, this is doom. There's absolute doom upon me. There's nothing going on that I can't fix this. And there's enough people standing in my courtroom and outside of the city that can completely just obliterate us right now. This is all a trap to let him get face to face with me. See, what happens to us when we seal off all possibilities? Think about the last time. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a leper pop in front of you and say, give you a letter with a lot of money that says you're expected to heal me. Like, I've never gone through that before. You might have. And you might handle that situation very differently than I have, or I would. But think about this. When was the last time that you sealed off all possibility of something good happening? When was the last time a circumstance happened that made you think there is no way we can recover from this? There's no way out. There's no way to fix things. There's no way to redeem things. There's no way this is going to end in my absolute and total destruction. That's what this king's doing now. And when we do that, we're doing the same thing the king of Israel did. What we're ultimately saying is, my world isn't big enough to handle this. And then we're telling God, and your world's not big enough either. When we get to that place of doom, we are sealing off all possibilities, internally and then externally with God. We're choosing to live in our world and not choosing to live in God's world. We think it's simply too big. But remember, little leads to little, and large loves lepers. So Elisha comes in, and he hears about this. I imagine like the rumors going down the streets, like it's kind of like hitting the grapevine. Did you hear about what happened? Naaman showed up, and he has all of his peoples, and he has chariots and spears and swords and arrows and shields. And the king told him no. So the word soon, it gets to Elisha, and he hears about this, and he hears about how the king has limited his idea of what God can do. And all he says is, just send him to me. Send him to me. We pick the story back up in verse 9. So Naaman went with his horses and his chariots and waited at the door of Elisha's house. But Elisha sent a messenger to him. Go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Then your skin will be restored and you will be healed of your leprosy. But Naaman became angry and stalked away. I thought he would certainly come out to meet me, he said. I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy and call on the name of the Lord as God and heal me. Aren't the rivers of Damascus, the Abana, and the Pharpar better than any of the rivers of Israel? Why shouldn't I wash in them and be healed? So Naaman turned away and went away in a rage. But his officers tried to reason with him and said, Sir, if the prophet had told you to do something very difficult, wouldn't you have done it? So you should certainly obey him when he says simply, go wash and be cured. So Naaman went down to the Jordan River and dipped himself 7 times as the man of God had instructed him, and his skin became as healthy as the skin of a young child, and he was healed. So think about this. He shows up full military retinue in front of Elisha's house. Elisha, at this point in time in the story, Naaman and Elisha have not even seen each other. I mean, Naaman is great. Schwarzkopf, Storm and Norman. I hope Naaman had a sweet nickname like that too. And like Elisha sends out a servant. Think about the roles of the servants in this story. These insignificant, meaningless people in their eyes. Sends a servant out. I mean, it's offensive. And says, go to the Jordan and dip 7 times in it. The Jordan, it's an important river to the Israelites, but it's kind of not a nice river. Like when I think about the river, I kind of think about like when you look at the Jordan River, the majority of places it looks like a dried up bayou. Like it's nothing to really brag about. I mean, he's in Damascus in Syria. It's like a very gorgeous, green, mountainous, beautiful place. And he's like, this is ludicrous. If all it is washing 7 times, I could have done that back home. It could have cost the king not $750 million. I could have like not worn out my chariot wheels. And his officers, people who work for him, come and say, man, listen, think about this. See, Elisha's playing with a different set of rules. He doesn't come out and meet him. Gives him something simple to do. And the officers, lucky enough, to realize what's going on and just kind of call him out on his junk. It's like if he would told you something hard, you would have done it. Or maybe they realize like this is not about what you're doing, but who you're doing this through. Naaman's insulted. And when we get mad, if you look at this, I laughed about this really hardly. He talks about how he went into a rage. You ever heard the term rage quit? It's like when people are playing video, like it's a video game thing. So they get really mad that like I'm a child of the 80s. I played Mario Brothers. Like when you lose your man, remember that? And like you throw the controller across the room, or if you look at look YouTube for a rage quit. You'll see people like getting mad and like slamming a keyboard over a desk. It's just like silly. You remember, I've done this plenty of times. My wife has seen it. You ever gotten so mad you kind of like throw like a spastic like fit? You just like throw something. Like you kick a table and hurt your toe. Like you're rage quitting. Like Naaman's rage quitting here. Like the most honored, high, big deal person. And the Aramean army is rage quitting. Like, imagine he's like throwing a spear kind of spastically or something. Like, when we rage quit, we make a fool of it. We look dumb when we rage quit. And that's what he's doing. He's becoming an obstacle to his own healing. But think about it. When we limit things, when we limit what God can do in our life, when we pull a rage quit, we're becoming our own obstacle. We're becoming our own bottleneck. We're saying, my world is too big for you, God. My problems are too big. I don't want to try to handle this or think about this or fix this in the way that you want me to. Naaman's officers, you will do something difficult. Why wouldn't you do something simple? I imagine he probably listened to him because he was embarrassed and he was trying to save face. So he went to the Jordan and he dipped 7 times. And Scripture said his skin was healed. What's really interesting is I got a little bit Bible nerdy this week, and you dig into the original language, and if you translate it out like literally, like deliberately, it says that his body had repented. Think about that. His body had repented. It had gone back to a previous state. We see that his skin was healed like that of a young child. We think now immediately to the young girl who told Naaman about this prophet in the very beginning. His body had returned to a previous state. His body had returned to to a more pure state, a more trusting state. Maybe you hear the phrase, have a faith like that of a little child, or some of the awesome things that kids can believe in sometimes that boggle our minds. In some ways, it's Naaman's body had returned to a different world. A world in which the unbelievable became believable. A world in which the unbelievable was big enough. A world where different things can happen. So it helps us think more about that. Little leads to little. But large loves lepers. When you get to the point to where you realize you're being an obstacle, when you realize that sometimes simple things can do significantly more than complicated things can, where little things can do significantly more than big things might appear to do. Little leads to little, and large loves lepers. Large loves those circumstances. So right now you might be thinking what I was thinking in the last couple of weeks, thinking about this, like, what do we have to do to get something big to happen in our life? What's going on there? And this is what I keep going back to thinking. What if all of the small stuff is actually a test to see if we can handle the bigger stuff? We've talked about this a lot. It's in Jesus' Gospels. It says, I've trusted you with a little, and now I trust you with much. What if all these small little things that we might want to kind of cut corners around at times, or might want to only kind of pop in a couple of days a week, or only when we think about it, what if our just little kind of passing over and passing by stops us from seeing what's truly big? What if we've been wanting to have something huge and dramatic happen, and all we really need to go do is dip ourselves in this kind of cruddy little river 7 times? I mean, the prophet doesn't even come out to talk to you. It's so little. But how have we scoffed, like Naaman did, at the ways that healing has been offered to us, and at the way that restoration has been offered to us, simply because it did not look dramatic enough? When we attach self-made limitations to the life with God, we will end up experiencing a self-limiting life. And it'd be horrible to realize that we did this to ourselves simply by not thinking big enough. What if we've been expecting good stuff to be a lot harder, and we've missed it. And Eugene Peterson is a writer that I love a lot, and he has a book that's the title of it's called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And it's just about doing the small, tiny things for a really long time. What if we've just been expecting it to be harder? So when I think about the ways that I know at times in my life I've kind of reset and tried to go back into this area, what I've found to be helpful is simple little things. Things that are so simple that I forget about them when I'm not paying attention to them. But 3 ways that we can grow God's world in our life. To act more like Elisha and not so much like Naaman. 3 simple things. The first one is this: it's Scripture. It's stories of past faithfulness. It's stories of where other people have realized they're being bottlenecks and obstacles. And they've either changed or they've not changed. It's stories where we realize that God's faithfulness has been dependable, and God's faithfulness is trustworthy, and God's faithfulness is bigger than our world. What is it like to just simply put Scripture in our lives? I was having a conversation with a friend of mine this week, and we were talking about how she realized that she could have the Bible read to her on her phone. And it was like, is it that easy? Really? But Scripture connects us with stories of past faithfulness. It's there, and it's helpful for us, not as a tool to figure out or to argue, or it builds up faithfulness because it shows us where it's happened in the past. Another way is prayer, because prayer talks about future faithfulness. Prayer is us grabbing the promises of God in the future and pulling them into our world now. Prayer is us situating ourselves in these future promises of God and saying, I'm going to hope, I'm going to trust, I'm going to live in this reality that I know is out there and I know is better than what I can come up with on my own. I'm investing in my future present and my life with prayer with you. The last way is with our generosity. And first you're like, okay, preacher, now you're talking about this. But think about this: generosity. It's with our resources. It's with our time. It's with our skills. It's with our ability. How many of you have taken hours to do something? When I was a kid, so my dad was a preacher too, and my dad, the most complicated thing my father has the ability to do is put gas in his car. And I remember when I was a kid, Dad took a week off of work to build a dog run in our backyard. Now, how many of y'all have ever installed fencing before? I'm looking at, there's people like me that will try it, and there's people that are out there that actually know how to do it. How long should it actually take to put a 30-yard run of storm fencing in a backyard? It took my dad 3.5 days. And it took him 3 days to realize he had to call somebody. And then he called somebody, and 3 hours later we had a fence. I've done that. How many of you it's like, I'm going to do this myself, I'm going to do this myself. We realize that you know people, you're connected to people already who have the ability to do things that are going to make your life better. Generosity is us being willing to say yes when that phone call comes. It's a state of mind. It's a state of living. Yes, it means financial generosity, but it also means our skilled generosity and our serving generosity. It means us being willing to live in the present in God's kingdom. It means us saying, you know what, I believe in every single thing you say about the future, and I believe in that future because I trust in your past, and because I believe in your future and I trust in your past, I'm going to act in your present. And I'm going to willfully choose to live in this bigger world, here and now, when I can see it and when I can't see it. I'm going to choose to not question why 7 dips in a cruddy river can heal someone of the most stopping thing that life knows. I'm going to not wonder why the servant comes out instead of the prophet. I'm not going to wonder why the king's don't understand how profits work. I'm going to realize that sometimes it's the tiny little things in life that make no sense to me are the most truthful things out there. I'm going to live in the world where God's kingdom does not look anything like what I think God's kingdom might look like, because I realize that I have the potential to self-limit things. I'm going to choose to be a person who lives in the future, who lives in the past, and who lives in the present and exercises that out. Little leads to little. When we expect little, we will get little. But large loves leopards. God's kingdom loves the impossible. God's kingdom loves the impossible because it shows us that it is bigger than we can ever imagine. And it can do things beyond our human capacity. And when God's kingdom goes big, it goes big. It means us handing over our limitations and our attempts to create a perfect world. Instead, going to God and realizing that what we just need to do is create the perfect environment for him to grow our world. We do that in our hearts, but we also do that in the places that we live around.